joining us for this extra special screening of the freshly released short film Extinction. And please welcome your host and co-writer of the film, Sam Knight.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the screening of Extinction to Rebels everywhere. Thanks very much for joining us. We've got a really fun panel today, made up of artists, theatre makers, actors, musicians, all of whom have been involved in Extinction Rebellion to varying degrees. We've got Jack Cooper-Stimpson, who is the director and co-writer of Extinction. We've got Raki Thakrar, who is a star of Sex Education, and more importantly, also star of Extinction. Kay Michael from the Culture Declares Emergency movement and editor of Letters to the Earth. Fainty Balogun, who is an actor and theatre maker and has been doing a series of really amazing talks that I'm sure we'll come on to discussing later. And Sam Lee, who is a musician and founder of the Nest Collective. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today. We're all gonna be taking your questions later on, and the discussion hopefully will be about crisis and how the arts industry, if we even want to call it an industry, can respond to crises. And obviously we are speaking in the midst of a crisis right now, and the wider crisis that is happening, and an ongoing climate and ecological emergency. And everybody on this call is thinking through the issues and the ways in which we can attempt to, as human beings and as artists, respond to those twinned emergencies. So if you have any questions about that or about the film itself, but I think hopefully we're going to have a wider discussion about the arts later on. So if you have any of those sort of like wider questions during this, message on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram, and I will put it to the panel later on. But we're going to start by having a screening of the new short film Extinction, which stars Emma Thompson, Raki Thakrar, and Tom Glinkani. I'm going to pass over to Jack Stimpson, who's the director of the film, to just give us a quick introduction, and then we'll show it to you. Jack.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sam. This is so exciting. This is the most interesting thing that's happened in quarantine. So I'm having a great time already. What can I say about the film? I guess a bit of context is quite useful. The film was originally kind of conceived as a nice bit of arty propaganda to get people involved with Extinction Rebellion last year. It was really my introduction to XR as an organization and the climate movement in general. And yeah, I was sort of totally swept up by the whole thing. It starts sort of what started off as research really sort of became a passion. And there was very evidently a story to tell. So me and Sam Knight wrote the film together, and we came up with this sort of fictitious story, what was then a fictitious story about a group of activists who meet with a senior Conservative MP, and what might go down in that room, basically. And we had a lot of fun writing that and just coming up with lots of silly jokes and people being late, and I don't want to spoil it, so I'll stop talking. But yeah, we just had great fun with that. And then obviously last year, sort of life imitated art, I suppose, and the UK declared climate emergency. So we had this weird scenario where it was sort of life imitating art, imitating life, I guess. It was a funny filter to look through. But it's so exciting to be sharing the film with everyone. I'm so glad it's out in the world and marking such an important anniversary. And yeah, I'm not going to say too much. It's a comedy, so please do laugh if you want to, or cry, or whatever emotions it inspires in you. But yeah, yeah, hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Cock.
Maybe we should start.
Yes, of course. Yes, great. Great.
Brilliant.
Yes, so.
Great. So, where do we start? Flo?
Right, well, I mean, maybe we just start from the start and go from there?
Great.
Great. Water?
Yes. Wait, what?
Does anyone want any water before we start? No.
No.
Great.
Great. Shit. So, Heba. Heba, I am saying that right.
Yes. So.
From Extinction Rebellion.
Yes.
Extinction because...
Of the animals.
Thank you, Flo, because of the animals.
And the Great Barrier Reef.
And the Great Barrier Reef.
Venice.
And rebellion because... Well, because...
Because we are in a state of non-violent, open rebellion against the UK government.
Right.
Eva!
Hi, Sam.
Right. Sorry, mate. We need better signage in this place. Or a map, like a fold-out map.
No need to bow.
You should have started without me.
We did. Water?
Oh, yeah, thanks.
All right.
Where were we?
You are in an open state of rebellion against the UK government.
And lateness is a sort of rebellion, I suppose.
Now, look, I think it's important to say that we aren't going to stop blocking bridges, shutting down roads, occupying buildings. This isn't going away, right? Right. Until we start to see some action from the UK government. I mean, what are we now? Sixth day of protest?
Sixth, yeah.
If you count today.
Which we do.
Which we obviously do.
So, the question is, how do we stop this?
The protests? Or the potential extinction of the human race? Both. Either. Anything, really. Okay, well, you can start by calling this crisis a crisis and treating it as such. So we've written you a statement. It outlines your reasons for declaring a state of emergency and promises a detailed plan of what to do next. In doing so, it pledges to reduce carbon emissions to net zero in the next 5 to 10 years, promising not to balance that burden on the backs of the poor or the historically oppressed. You can't say that.
Can't say what?
Well, for starters, you can't really swear in a ministerial address.
I am on my way to a meeting. Will you please stop shouting? Just calm down. Oh, nice room. Oh, I'm in the meeting. I've found the meeting. I don't care if they've got a fucking water cannon. They're not going to fucking use it. It isn't Tiananmen Square. Do you know what I mean?
You're late.
Just stop it. Yes, I know I'm here. No, just breathe. Jane, they're police. They're not Martian. I'm so sorry. I was so with you. They are hot and they are tired and they know you're right. So just offer them a cup of tea, all right? I'm going now. Just hold that bridge. Okay, good girl. I tell you, fucking organising is just so much more work than government. I'm sitting down. Okay. Sorry. What have I missed? Oh, in one of those. Plastic is a sin. Hello, Peter.
Emma.
So, come on, what have I missed?
The statement, there are just a few teeny-weeny issues.
Nothing we can't iron out, I'm sure.
Don't flirt with her.
What? No, I'm not.
It's not speed dating.
That's not how I flirt.
It's so
Mum, stop.
Mum?
Yes, he is the fruit of my loin.
Pork.
No, we're vegan.
Sorry, can I just clarify? I wasn't flirting with you. I wouldn't flirt with you.
Are anarchists against flirting?
Only with the state.
Sorry, do you two know each other?
Yes.
We so do. Big time.
University.
Sorry to interrupt. Okay. The statement. Are we doing the statement?
We are not going to do anything.
I don't understand.
That's a surprise.
Your policies.
Our policies?
This current system is killing people. People are dying right now because you aren't prepared to do what is right. In the global south...
Heber, I'm not in charge of the global south. My constituency is Henley-on-Thames.
They are not responsible for this crisis. We are. Our economic system...
Ah, yes, I know you don't like our economic system.
...is killing people. And you don't seem to actually care.
Look, it's actually a very complex situation. I think it's immoral and perhaps even dangerous to declare such a state of emergency with no guaranteed strategy or solution out of it. And without the proper scientific research, we can't make this statement. It's simply not possible.
Why won't you tell the truth?
People aren't ready for the truth!
Oh, no. Sorry,
Right.
can we just...
Jackpot!
Let's make Don't put that out. You know better than anyone that everything anyone wants to say is... You have no...
I don't need to look at this statement to understand that most of this is a load of rubbish. We have to deal with this in a civilised manner.
Can we stop letting these people in?
All right, calm down. Peace and love, man. Peace and love. Vulcan.
Sorry?
His name. Long story.
Where are you all coming from?
I come from Ipswich. I got the train down this morning.
It's lovely, Ipswich.
So, why is everyone shouting?
Because I have been putting up with 40 years of this fucking patriarchal bullshit! That's why I'm shouting!
Okay, so... no statement then?
No statement. It's clear that it's a waste of everyone's time and energy, and frankly, I have...
See, the way I see it, this whole thing is a bit like Star Wars, right? And we're the rebels, obviously. And you lot over there, you're like the Empire. And you're like Darth Vader or some shit, sitting in your TIE fighter, yeah?
Sorry to interrupt, Circus Man. I was just thinking, don't you think we're more like a Death Star, size-wise?
Yeah, nice one, mate. But the thing is, until we all start listening to each other, until we start treating each other like human beings, there's always going to be a dispute in the galaxy, man. You feel me?
So, who are the Jedis?
I don't think there are any Jedis, are there? I mean...
Well, if there was a more inclusive decision-making structure around this subject, that could be like a people's assembly, then that could be like a force or something, and then everyone could be a Jedi.
This is ridiculous!
Yes, it is ridiculous. People are dying, and what are you going to do about it?
I propose a tea break. Maybe some biscuits? Are you allowed biscuits?
Of course we are.
I love biscuits.
We are not on hunger strike.
So what's the verdict, Pete, eh? You've heard enough. Come on.
No. No bloody biscuits! No bloody teas or coffees! This is a waste of my time! We're done here!
So well, that's it? You really think you've done everything that you can? Oh, you're just going to walk out, hope that we go away, hope that this issue goes away?
Yes, I am. And nobody's going to stop me!
Actually, I'm going to have to stop you, sir. The protesters have blocked the entrances and exits, so we need you all to stay in this room until it's under control. Nobody leaves, all right? Nobody leaves.
Give us a smile, go on. Yeah.
Let that be a lesson to you.
Pete, come on up.
May the force be with you, man.
Cock.
Ain't no fish, ain't no flounder, ain't no tuna, ain't no fish.
holy mackerel. Some days there just ain't no fish,
ain't no perch,
ain't no flounder. You flounder for fish,
ain't no fish.
And although at times you get a mess full, other days are less successful. Some days there just ain't no fish. Wish for a catch every day and you're wasting a wish. For some days there just ain't no fish.
Okay, cool. Hopefully that worked, and you saw bits of that. I think there were like a little couple technical issues, and you might even at one point have been able to see our own internal messages going, is the screen frozen for you too? Is it frozen? So a little bit of bonus content there for you. Extinction, the short film, is now out on YouTube. If you want to go and have a look at the sort of high-res version, you can get it. I think it's like @FilmExtinction is the Twitter and Instagram handles, and the YouTube is up for you to like and share and tell your gran about. We're very lucky to be joined by star of the short, Raki. Hey, Raki.
Hi.
Thanks so much for joining us. I just wanted to sort of kick things off by coming to you and asking you why you did a film like this, which I know is a sort of silly question, but you know, you've been in sexual education, you've been in For Weddings and a Funeral, and I guess I'm interested to know what attracted you to a short film about Extinction Rebellion and what the process of that was like compared to doing anything else.
Oh gosh, it came through on an email from my agent, and quite honestly, I thought they'd gotten the wrong person because I was like, it was a straight offer, and this honestly, I love the script so much, and I was just like, I don't think they can. You go back and just make sure that they mean me, and it was, and I just thought. Firstly, it was my introduction to Extinction Rebellion because I didn't know an awful lot about them actually. And looking back now, that's quite surprising because they were making such headlines. But it was sort of fascinating because and that's sort of one of the best things about our job is that it delves us in, it lets us like leap into worlds that we don't know about maybe. And the second thing was the script was so, I know you like might blush now, you and Jack, but it was so good. And it was one of those things that you read and you can sort of, actors will probably get this, you can just say it straight away because it feels sort of good around your mouth. That sounds really rude. But you know what I mean? It's sort of, it felt really real and natural and very funny. And so there was no reason to say no, really. I was so excited to do it. And then Jack and I sat down for about 3 hours and chatted about the character and stuff, and it just the things just started to get better and better. Yeah, that's my reason.
Did the process of doing it in any way change your attitude towards the climate crisis? Or I mean, it must have been a bit of a bizarre experience to do because we were filming it during the April Rebellion, right? And then it sort of came true like 2 days after we filmed it.
Yeah, I know that. I couldn't believe that because you had the sit down, didn't it? It was you and three. Yeah. I know, and that was one of those bizarre things. And this is the other thing is like when it's lovely to do like entertainment, but when you get to do something that really has an effect or really touches upon something that matters, and then that might sort of educate or inspire someone to be active against injustices, that was really exciting about the project. And for me, I've never really been to that many protests. It's really weird. I didn't grow up in a very political household. And so for me, I'm learning as I go. And it's really weird. This can sound ridiculous, but I didn't feel confident to go to protest. I know it sounds silly, but and it sort of gave me the confidence to go, no, I should fight for these things and I should be there and I should add my voice to these rallies. And so I went to the protest and it was just the most incredible atmosphere. And I remember listening to these women talking, they're sort of like the letters. I don't know if we might be touching upon that later, but there was just some really inspiring content, and yeah, so it did change things for me in terms of activism and stuff. I think in the film I'm probably most like Flo in that I'm very new to it, and I'm here to learn, and I really want to.
Oh, that's so cool, and that's such a good introduction as well to the topic, because I think all of the artists in the school are to varying degrees concerned with trying to make activism accessible and sort of activism mainstream as well. And you know, one of my preoccupations at the moment is whether we should all be moving past the idea of sort of activist labels. Even I sort of in despair that this is something that people sort of see as a hobby, as opposed to an intrinsic thing that all human beings should be engaged in. But I think that's a really nice segue to move on to Jack, the director, again. And Jack, I was wondering if, I mean, this is slightly odd because obviously I'm talking to you and we've worked so closely on this project, but I was wondering if you could just talk about maybe like the less sexy side of it, the problems and what the challenges are that when you set about to create a piece of activism. And I think this is film as activism. It does have something more akin to like propaganda than it has to sort of conventional things that we're used to seeing. What are the limitations of that, and what do you come up against when trying to do it?
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the unsexy side of it, Sam. That's very kind of you.
That's what you were wanting.
But very happy to take up the mantle of unsexy filmmaking. No, I genuinely think it's a really important conversation to have, because filmmaking and activism, actually, I would argue, it's not an easy marriage. I think it can be a really complicated thing to kind of match up, because activism, you know, is run on passion and community and so many things that don't really have a very obvious currency to them, I'd say, whereas filmmaking is just very expensive. And, you know, it's hard to find funding for, you know, amazing films that have tens of like A-lister celebrities in them or whatever. So yeah, it was a challenge for us. You know, we didn't have long to turn things around on the project. I think we started writing in December 2018. And we knew we had to shoot in April because we wanted to get the crowd footage of the April Rebellion. So we had, you know, no time at all. And it was, you have to find your funding, you have to find your cast, crew and distribution, all that stuff as soon as possible. And we do have some sort of hilarious horror stories of nearly taking money from very dubious sort of sources of people who had invested in oil and stuff. And it's a real minefield to try and get all the money together. But you know, we're a young crew, the core kind of creative team. I think our kind of average age is like 25, and you know, we pulled in every favor in the book. We wrote to our favorite actors, you know, people like Raki and Emma and Tom, and we were just very lucky, I guess, that everyone was available and everyone was up for it. But there is a wider conversation to be had for sure about, you know, is this going to be possible? And yeah, do we have to just remove that activism label in order to kind of integrate into the mainstream? Because we don't want this stuff to be alternative, and we don't want to have to call in favors all the time. You know, we were really proud on set we paid all of our crew and cast because that felt like the right thing to do. People shouldn't really work for free because this is what everyone does as a job, regardless of whether they believed in, you know, the message of the film. So it's yeah, it definitely opens up a wider conversation about yeah, how we kind of make it possible in the future.
Do you worry about it at all? I mean, I guess one of the things I'm interested in drawing out, which I've never really, because there are so many discussions about like art in a times of crisis and coronavirus and climate change, and you know, one of the things that I'm sort of yearning for is the real challenges that artists are coming up against now. And I'm wondering about, for you, like how, is it hard? Because, you know, you mentioned stuff there, like we made sure everything was from sustainable sources. We made sure all the financing was just and fair. We made sure that there was vegan catering and that the production company was gender balanced. And that then became a source of something that the right-wing newspapers could attack for it. So you saw like the Times and Breitbart and various other right-wing Rupert Murdoch-owned newspapers piling in and criticism. And I wonder whether there is a part of you that worries about your sort of career if we're allowed to talk about that in these times of crisis and collapse, whether that even matters, or whether that is something that you think about, and what are the negative effects it might have. Do you think it closes doors doing this sort of stuff?
Yeah, undoubtedly, yeah. I mean, it's a funny thing, I guess. You know, being an artist, it's hard anyway, right? You know, you're constantly sort of having to think about the next job and stuff. So yeah, when you're putting your big political opinions forward at the same time, yeah, I think it becomes really, really complicated. But equally, I think you just have to put faith that if you're that you're going to be on the right side of history and you're telling a really important story. I mean, it's all the art of persuasion, I guess, is the way that I'm trying to think of it. You know, this is all just trying to give people a message. And I guess there's three takeaways from our film. That's sort of the important thing, is like there's the minutiae of it, of like, we want to make people laugh. It's a comedy. We want people to see the sort of the chaotic, passionate energy of activism, which I hope is kind of portrayed in the film. We want to kind of remind people about what we can achieve when we do all get out into the streets and put our heads together and kind of unite, I suppose, because the state of emergency is really it's a big deal, and we shouldn't forget that. And then there's also the sort of sending the message back into the industry, I guess, and kind of reminding people that we need to be picking the stories that we tell really, really carefully now more than ever. You know, we can't afford to keep ignoring these issues and these characters and just this topic in general. You know, we hear it in like so many reports and stuff, and I'm thinking about the IPCC report in 2018. You know, like going against fighting global warming needs to encompass everything, and I don't think the film industry should be an exception to that rule. You know, it's an industry, and it's run on sort of capitalist values, and it's an industry by its very nature, I suppose. So it's going to be really, really hard to turn that around. It's not a nimble, quick machine. Like, you can't just sort of redirect it. It's not a bicycle, if you like. It's like a tank. And if you want to reposition a tank, it takes a long time to pivot it around or whatever. I've taken that metaphor too far. But anyway, but it's going to take time and energy. But I just really hope the short kind of shows that it is possible. Because as you say, you know, all these values and all these things that we've wanted to implement into the industry, we managed to do it over the course of that shoot, and well into post-production as well. It's worth mentioning, you know, and just a huge thank you to everyone who has put in the time and energy into the film and has worked with those values, because it does slow things down sometimes. It does make things more complicated. But I think it's worth it in the long run.
Great, cool. And on that reminder about how we need to think about the industry and how the industry needs to change, let's open up this conversation to other artists, to other theatre makers and actors and musicians. Just before we do that, a reminder that if anyone has any questions for this sort of second half of the discussion, then please do send them in on any channel. We'll be monitoring those, and I'll put them to the panel. We're hoping to have a sort of discussion in the next half hour about how arts can respond in a time of crisis, what the challenges are, and what we can all, I guess, contribute to that as a conversation. So thinking about that, I want to go to UK. Obviously, you were one of the founders of Culture Declares Emergency, right? Which is this initiative designed to try and get the culture industries in sort of various forms to take the climate and ecological emergency seriously, and to not only start programming art about it, but also change the way that they create art. And I guess one of the things I'm really interested, we're going to have to play out a trailer for Extinction Underground, which was a festival that you and others put on during the Vaults Festival. And there was a huge diversity of different art forms there. And I think one of the things that everybody knows about Extinction Rebellion, just sort of intrinsically, is how artistic and creative it is. I mean, you only have to look at some of the images that the newspapers love putting over their front pages to know that this is an artistic movement. This is powered by a creative force. but very often that creative force doesn't quite adhere to traditional forms of art or traditional sort of mainstream ways that are sort of taken seriously by the sort of industry. I'm wondering whether you can talk a little bit about how Culture Declares Emergency, about how the work you're doing is trying to sort of reposition what we think of as art, if that's not too big a question.
Wow, yeah, it's a big question. Thanks, Sam. I mean, just to say, I think, Jack, after hearing you speak about the film and the values that you made that with, it's absolutely the ambition of Culture Declares Emergency for artists and cultural institutions to reimagine what their role is in these times, as you've described, and to reimagine how art is made, as well as what the art is that is made. We've actually had up to 1,000 declarers, so 1,000 artists and cultural institutions declare climate and ecological emergency and then take action to address justly this emergency that we're in. And in fact, that includes institutions such as the BFI. So, there are huge waves happening in highly reputable institutions. And so I think actually we don't have to, I mean, in answer to your question, Sam, yes, there is a great reimagining of what art is now, but there's also a great recognition that, we're great art makers here in this country, and there's every reason why films can still be made and dance can still be made and opera could perhaps still be made, but with redefined values and a new story to be told. However, yeah, at Extinction Underground, the festival that was produced in February across a wide range of movements, Culture Declares, XR, Music Declares Emergency, Comics Rebel, Writers Rebel, a huge array of artists. We did present over 80 artists across all kinds of disciplines that you might say are mainstream, circus, dance, live music, DJs, and all of those disciplines do a great job in motivating and energizing and inspiring people, raising awareness of the story of our times, just like your film has done. But in the beauty of a live event, live theatre and live musical events bring people together. And there's a great display of community and connection and resilience and solidarity. So it was really for the benefit of those that are feeling the emotional impact of this emergency as well, to build that emotional resilience with each other. And that's something also that Letters to the Earth has achieved. I think, Raki, you were referring to that earlier, that you may have seen during the rebellion in the spring last year. These letters that we invited the public to write expressed a whole range of emotion in response to this emergency. And that in itself was a form of art, and also the form of art being where you had young children writing alongside Yoko Ono, alongside Caroline Lucas. Suddenly everyone is an artist in these times. Everyone has something to say. Everyone has action to take. So I think we're talking about, for me, that's what I mean by new ways of making art, new ways of even imagining what art is, when we're talking about the collectivity and the diversity of the input into that piece of work. And it's a do it together movement, just as XR is. We make things together. This is an emergent co-creation. We're doing things we've never done before, but we're doing it together. And we're obviously going to be creating new things that we've never before. I hope that goes some way into answering.
Yeah, absolutely does. Great, and let's draw Fainty in as well at this point in the discussion. And Fainty, I'm interested in, like, we sort of touched on there the importance of experience and also speaking to as many people as possible. And the talks that you've been doing, which are all about your experience of the climate crisis and how climate change affects you. And I mean, particularly like the focus on racial justice and the fact that we can't divorce the climate crisis from structural oppression, and how these two things are interlinked that the struggle for climate justice is the same struggle for economic and social emancipation, which is a really important thing that I think increasingly the climate movement needs to be talking about. And I'm wondering about what compelled you to do those talks and what your experience of doing them has been.
Big question. Yeah, I guess I was. I wasn't very. I didn't grow up in a political household, and I feel like that's true of a lot of people who may have like parents who've emigrated to the country, who have lineages other than just being British. That there is sort of like this reluctance to be anything else but like pliable or like accepting, to not stick out. And that's where the need to like disseminate information came from, because I started wandering into activism because of doing acting and being creative is amazing, but also it felt like a bit pointless if it all goes to shit in a couple of years. Which was a whole thing in itself. Anyway, I was led towards activism and helping out XR in the April protests. And I got into an argument with my mother because she couldn't understand why I was doing that. And my mum is British born, but of Nigerian descent, and grew up in Nigeria. And my grandparents came over here and then back to Nigeria. But she's very much, culturally Nigerian with like sprinkles of Britishness. And it was just not a thing to be involved in. And so then you've got this huge problem, which is climate emergency, which is going to affect us in huge ways, already is affecting us in huge ways. And then you've got the minute problems, the more insular problems of the household and survival and the way we're seen, and everyday casual racism that just like happens every day for no reason. And there are all these little things that distract you from this big issue, because it's a symptom of all the patriarchy, of colonialism, of capitalism. These are all symptoms. Climate emergency is all symptoms of these structural issues, and those structural issues stop us from being involved in the first place. So like I'm talking to my mum and like going, well, it's this and this and this, and she's like, I don't understand, regardless of that, why you're on the front line in front of a policeman. Like, do you not know the history of our people? Anyway, so I had this whole sort of like existential crisis, and I became like a child, as you do when you're with your mum. It's like, you don't understand. You'll never understand anything I say. You don't get it. You don't even see me, blah, 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 blah. So I went away with that. Talked to my friend, Elliot, we talked. And, I forgot to say, we had a big argument. We stopped talking. We had a big argument, and I recorded it on my phone, and so my mum didn't realise at all. And just because I needed to understand it. Anyway, months later, I listened to the recordings with a friend of mine, and it was so interesting because I was starting to understand like her viewpoint. Why is it that she sees all these things were being exposed? And I was like, right, okay, so this is information that I don't think anybody talks about, really. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these recordings of my mum, and I'm going to make a talk like the Heading for Extinction talk, but designed around her points of view and around people of colour in this country specifically. And I'm going to go and talk to people of colour in this country and give them that point of view from that aspect, including those things. So that is the long and short of that journey, Sam.
Amazing, thanks, Painty. Let's return to that in a minute, but I also want to draw in our final panelist, Sam Lee, who is a musician. If anyone hasn't been listening to Singing with Nightingales, I really recommend that you go listen to that. That is also on YouTube currently, and it is one of the most soothing things I've heard in a long time. I've been sending it to everyone I know. So Sam, I guess going off the back of what Fainty was talking about, I'm sort of wondering how you respond to that, and how song can be itself a sort of call to arms, and particularly the song you do, which is so concerned with nature and the living world.
Yeah, well, it's nice to have this conversation when I've got a wren singing, one of the greatest singers in the world, and I'm out right next to him. I'm out in Sussex, and I think to focus on music as an art form that is, you know, is where I work, but also in terms of how the arts generally work towards the sort of the working towards the hearts of people. That what we've got with the ecological emergency is as has been said wonderfully by Caroline Lucas in Letters to the Earth, a crisis of the imagination. And it's an intellectual issue that we have to get over, about how people's understanding of this existential issue that for many people is not being directly experienced, or certainly not within, you know, close connection, but actually how do we invite the awareness of what's happening, the small changes, the big changes that are occurring. Extinction happens at a very slow level, piece by piece. The loss of habitat, the loss of species, that it's the kind of slow boiling of the frog. And very rarely do you see such mass devastation that causes shock and change. So we're dealing with a very complex issue, and the art and music, you know, is my chosen art form. But music, I feel, is one of the most powerful ways and most ancient ways of bringing about social change and affecting people's hearts in a way that you get into the heart, you make the change in the head there. And music, you know, the musicians of the world. I'm one of the kind of founder members of Music Declares that Kay was mentioning earlier, sister organisation with Culture Declares, and inspired through XR's actions over the last 18 months. And, you know, very much looking at how do we as a music community use our platform and our space that we have to bring about change within our audiences and our listenership. And over the last 60, 70 years, music has been one of the most powerful forms of social change. You look at the civil rights movement and the power of protest songs, you know, from Pete Seeger and Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan over in America. And so we've always been in a very privileged position to bring up that about. And I picked up an expression at the October Rebellion that I heard somewhere on the picket line on the barricades, that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that really that my role is both to use nature and the issues surrounding the beauty of it to exemplify and communicate it in interesting ways, be that online as I'm doing at the moment, or through actual experience of gathering concerts outside, and really focusing on individual species and their beauty and also their sensitivity to try and affect that change, but also how we can work collectively to bring the situation we're in to other musicians and the industry as a whole, to affect change as in a unified way, to actually empower artists to speak up in whatever way they can and want to, but also bring the acceptability that speaking about climate and ecology and the impacts that it's having socially is both acceptable and it's accessible to everybody, because it's an issue that affects everybody in very different ways, and we need as many ways of communicating it as we need pairs of ears. And I will not reach particular audiences, and I will not listen to many artists who will be saying this. That's just the way it goes. So I think my job, I find, is about introducing the different ways of, particularly within the arts, of finding other musicians love of the natural world, particularly to start to experience what the impact and what the sense of grief can be about loss of biodiversity and the actual impact on ecosystems, let alone the impact it's going to have on our well-being. For me, it's really about protecting of habitat and ecosystem that's so important. And that has been forever where culture began, was out of the garden, ultimately the proto-garden. And I think it's so important to reintroduce the arts and the art making to this place as a source of inspiration. I won't go on too much more about that, but yeah, I mean, that's a ramble, but that's kind of where I'm coming from.
It's a fascinating ramble, and I think what we should do now is open up the panel and just sort of all pile in to a couple of the questions that's raising, I guess. just sort of, we've got a first audience question through, so I'm going to ask it, and then we'll just sort of see where this leads us. And it's a nice one in terms of the activist call to arms here, and it's how can people watching this right now get involved in the arts? And I think that's sort of particularly in relation to the lockdown and quarantine and these times which I think artist production feels quite hard. Is it even something we should be doing? Has been a strand that has run for, I think, all of your answers, and I just want to throw that back out there. And
I mean, well, there are Sam's Nightingales that you've already mentioned that can be listened to, I think, still. That's still happening. There is also the invitation with Letters to the Earth, for example. That's an ongoing invitation for people to write, and there's quite a cathartic process in writing a personal letter to or from anything. It could be, to the earth, from the earth, but also to or from other species, people in positions of power, to people you're thinking of, and especially in this time of uncertainty and separation during lockdown, that's been a really meaningful process for people. And so that invitation is still there to write and share your letters. But also there's a new campaign that I think was launched yesterday called Winds of Change, which is inviting people to make wind catchers for their gardens and their streets to really symbolize the hope for a just transition out of this lockdown. And so that's a craft-based activity that anyone can get involved in. I mean, I've never made a wind catcher before in my life, but I'm going to have a go. But there are instructions, so look up Winds of Change.
Amazing. Does anyone else have something that they'd like to raise?
I'm also thinking about all of the sort of major London theatres or theatres across the UK who are now releasing stuff for free, which is an amazing tool. I'm so glad it's finally happening, because there's most, as far as I'm aware, I'm not a theatre expert at all, but I'm sure most productions are filmed or live streamed to cinemas, because that's what happens now. It's so good that's that's happening. Those are accessible, those are free. So I guess it does sort of spawn the question about accessibility, and why does that not happen more? Why is stuff not online beyond global pandemics? Because that's a great tool for people to have. You can access stories and exciting things whilst being sat in your pants, which is great.
I'm going to leap in here and say that it's we couldn't be in a more interesting and worrying time for the arts, because arts needs to be funded. Artists need to live and be supported, and we are in about to enter into a massive financial crisis. The Arts Council have given up, in the UK, have given up absolutely everything they have in reserve to try and keep artists going. Major institutions such as the South Bank Centre and the Roundhouse are worried about their actual ability to weather storms like this. There's going to be it's a great wind that's coming through the forest right now, but to continue that ecological analogy, it also opens up an enormous amount of light into places where art can happen, as it's been doing, pioneered by Extinction Rebellion in such an extraordinary democratic way, and allowing creativity to suddenly be taken up by other people. And I think, to continue what Kay was saying, the Letters to the Earth prompted as is what we need to do really in this situation, is to ask the question of our communities to start to make creative responses. And to make creative responses, you have to actually really start to ask some hard questions of what your personal feeling is towards the situations. And that's where people are sort of invited into a place of really having to accept their own role within what's going on. And I think that's a very, very powerful thing. And what we're going to come out of the other side of COVID is a place of where there are many more artists with many more channels and opportunities, and I think the message is going to be really is going to be central to that. Our message that we're talking about, our messages are going to be very central to that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it also draws on this importance of the collective and the movement, right? And we're all speaking as people who are members of a movement and who have been inspired to create art for that movement and in response to that movement. And I so often we conceive of artists as individuals, and I think what's sort of notable about everybody on this call is that they've done this as a joint enterprise. And Sam, even as someone who is a solo musician, the sort of impulse to have the Nest Collective and the musicians around you who are concerned with sort of the similar things. I'm sort of wondering about everyone's interest and reliance and need to have community around you and how that relates to activism.
I don't want to answer that question. I would love to hear the answer from others. I've done a lot of speaking already.
It's interesting, the thing about community, because just picking up on what you were saying, Fancy, like that it is a good time because it's quiet and, you know, there's time for reflection to, like you said, time to ask those tough questions, but to, especially to sort of communities of like, so for, you know, for us, Asian families, again, don't have, at least my family doesn't have a massive history of activism or getting involved in politics. It is like, keep your head down and just, you know, get through. And while times are quiet, it's maybe a good time to have those quiet conversations where there isn't, you know, the noise isn't as loud about this. You know, there's other things going on and everyone's trying to connect. And so maybe in order to create the art that we want, we need to sort of listen to the real voices in our own little circles, and maybe those conversations can be started to be had now while it's quiet. Because I know my parents watched this film, and my whole family, and it's not something they would have ever, I don't think, seen otherwise, and would have known about this in the way that this film sort of tackles. And it's the perfect time to sort of say, what do you think about it? What do you know about it? What could we maybe do as a family to help the situation in small ways that doesn't use like big words or anything, because, you know, it's about making it feel small, I think, at the moment, so it feels like something you can do and get on board. I think sometimes it can have a tendency to feel so big and so political that it's scary and intimidating. So while it's quiet, it's a good time to have those quiet conversations, I think. That's what I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose that really speaks as well, Fainty, to what you've been doing, which is a project that came out of educative work, but also work held in dialogue and saying, how am I speaking to communities that aren't traditionally associated in the sort of UK white-focused climate movement, which for too long has ignored communities like these? How are we reaching out, and how can we talk to them? I'm wondering whether that, as an educative impulse, has then influenced the sort of art that you're making that might not necessarily be that.
Yeah, hugely. I think there's a lot of merit in everything everybody is saying. But one thing that I think I have to like acknowledge, especially now, just thinking about like the projects and everything I have to acknowledge, is like is the privilege, just quite simply privilege, in that like I have the privilege to be here and like say, please can my family not use my living room for the next 2 hours because I'm doing like a live stream. But like there are people who have just this one room to like just sleep in, as well as, you know, eat and sleep. And so like when it comes to climate breakdown and the language of, and it's not even the language of it, it's the science, the factual evidence of this thing, which is so overwhelming and terrible. It's one, a lot to take on. Two, if you're the person who gets it and are in those situations where you can't really talk, it's a lot of pressure to put on yourself to disseminate that information for other people and then answer those questions and be fine. It's like a lot. It's like, I'm not Jesus. I'm not even Judas. I'm like the guy in the background is like, burn him. No, don't burn him. Burn him. No, don't burn him. I don't know what I'm doing. But it's like, I think acknowledging those things is really, really important. And in those situations, so I made that project for myself, and I've been doing the tour, and then I talked to Complicity. Shout out to the Complicity gang, Sam McBurney, Polly, Laura, you know who you are, you're great. We break that up and we turn that into this, you know, this incredible project where I got to write songs and spoken word, and I got to speak in a language of my community. But that was all in the moment catharsis. That was in moments like this, writing for myself, for writing's sake, and not necessarily to be a thing of activism. And I just think in terms of creativity and creating things for the future, some of the things that make us the most creative is just expecting nothing, just doing it because it made me feel better in that point, or because it might be good, or because it could be awful. And I think that's something to, like, I'd really like to just like to make a point of, is that in this moment of like absolute, can I swear? Absolute fucking craziness, like where like one day it's like, oh, I achieved so much, and the other day it's like, I didn't get out of bed. Like just like writing something down on a piece of paper that is your connection to the earth, your connection to the understanding of frustration with the situation, may turn into something else at another point, and that's like okay. Just seedlings of moving forward are so important, because I didn't realize I'd be working with Complicity. I didn't realize I'd be making a show. I didn't realize like the poetry I was writing to like stop feeling awful was going to turn into like this semi-musical. I didn't know any of these things because it was just arts for art's sake at the moment. And then with my experience as a person of color, I got to write from my experience. And that's something that I think a lot of people hear. What I don't know who's live streaming. I don't know, my brother could be here. What's up? But like, if you are of a certain experience in the background, if you look around you and you think there is no one else that looks like me, talks like me, is in my situation to represent how I feel, you could be that person. And there's a lot of pressure in that, as is with just being a person of color, because you have to explain why things are racist all the time. It's really annoying. But you could take that on for you, not for anyone else in this moment, but just for you. And I think that is a form of activism, and a really brave one at that. Yeah, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
No, thank you. That was great. I mean, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap things up, even though we could talk about this for hours, and we need to talk about this for hours because it is such an important and pressing thing. But that reminder that you've just given us, that we don't need to feel the weight of the world on our shoulders, which I think a lot of artists do. I've heard so many artists talk about this recently, is feeling the weight of climate breakdown bearing down upon their art. And there is this, I think, this sort of egoistic actually like impulse to try and surmise everything to do with the climate crisis. This idea that you're going to write the climate crisis play, the climate crisis song, the climate crisis musical. And you can't, because the climate crisis is such a crisis made up of myriad crises. It is made up of the crisis of capitalism and of colonialism and of so many different aspects that we would be here for hours if we wanted to unpack. And art, whilst it can gesture towards all of that, can only do what it can do in certain moments. And I think that's important, to relieve ourselves sometimes of that. And I think it is an egotistical burden, but it is a burden nonetheless, which says, I have to do that. I have to change things or change everything with this one piece of art. So we're going to end the live stream now with a final trailer for the Culture Declares emergency movement and Extinction Underground, which we talked about previously. And if there are any people out there listening to this, which I hope there is, we'd also just like to end with a call out and to say that whatever that you are doing, whatever that you are producing, and if you are not producing anything right now, that all of those responses are valid. The climate crisis is also a crisis of imagination, and we're going to need a revolution in order to get ourselves out of this. What that really means is we need a revolution of the imagination. And that imagination for years, for decades, for centuries has been defined, has been articulated by poets and by musicians, by writers, by theatre makers. And it is the responsibility of everybody and the duty of everybody, but also the freedom of everybody and the privilege of everybody to try and articulate what a just and sustainable future looks like. So please keep on going, and we will leave you with this trailer. Thanks.
Don't wait any longer. And the sun's getting stronger, while the ice is wearing thin. Come out of the shadows, so your voice can be received. Don't stand on the sidelines. Come fight for the air that you breathe, 'cause we all have the power to change. Yeah, we all have the power to change. There's a hole in the forest where we planted our own seed, dug up what was honest and poisoned it with greed. And now there's blood in the oceans, and the wound is running deep. Don't rush for your potions. Don't numb yourself back to sleep, 'cause we all have the power to change. Yeah, we all have the power to change. To change.